Blessings, beloveds. I'm back again to talk about the divine feminine energy through the other two asteroids that I didn't have the opportunity to talk about in my last video. So my last video I spoke about Pallas Athena, the warrior goddess, and Ceres, the earth mother, the mother goddess. So today I'll be continuing on, and I'm going to bring in Juno and Vesta. So I'll start with Vesta and then go on to talking about Juno, obviously. I won't be talking about Lilith today. I just don't think I'll have the time. There's so much to cover with Vesta and Juno, and even in this video, this is merely an introduction, okay? So it's merely to give people a basic understanding of what Juno and Vesta represent in the birth chart. So Vesta is the sacred keeper of the flame, of the fire. She rules Scorpio and Virgo in the horoscope chart, and she's a very important asteroid, and she's a huge asteroid, even astronomically speaking. You can actually see her with the naked eye in the heavens. She's such a big asteroid. She's the daughter of Kronos, which is the planet Saturn. So as a result of that, I think her energy, being the daughter of Saturn, holds something about that Saturnian energy in the form of dedication and devotion as well. Saturn normally doesn't get a good rap when we hear about him, but here's another story. Perhaps I'll talk about the planets at a later stage. But she certainly represents devotion and dedication, with the being the holder of the sacred flame. Now, her energy is essentially the principle of sexual energy, but not in the mundane form of sexual activity. She used her sexual energy for personal integration. She wasn't a Juno type where she needed a relationship. She wasn't a Lunar or a Venus type. She really stands out unto her own self with her energy and what she represents. She had a group of women who were known as the Vestal Virgins, who essentially worked for her, and their primary role and duty was to maintain this eternal sacred flame, to keep it going. So there was a sacred flame in everybody's home, which was represented by Vesta, back in the Olympian era, if you like. It's a really powerful spiritual energy, actually, that Vesta brings through the birth chart. And like I've mentioned previously, whatever you are looking at in the horoscope chart, first of all, nothing is looked at in isolation, because nothing is in isolation. Everything is connected, interconnected in some way, shape or form. So when we're looking at Vesta, we really need to be looking at her sign placement, house placement, and the aspects that are formed through in the birth chart. All those things are going to describe how she functions and operates in your own birth chart. So from a polarity perspective, because everything we look at in the birth chart has a polarity point, such as the ascendant, descendant, the MC, the IC, all the houses are opposite each other, and that means there's a polarity point. In the same way, when we're looking at the signs, or when we're looking at the planets, or when we're looking at the asteroids, they each hold a polarity point as well. And it's really important to understand the polarity point, because the polarity point is essentially the shadow aspect, if you like. And the shadow aspect is always lying dormant in the unconscious and the subconscious. field or fields of who we are and how we operate. So her polarity points are the sense of devotion, and the extreme opposite of that is fanaticism. So when a person has a strong Vesta in their chart, it is going to be an individual who is, depending on, you know, where it's located in their chart, what sign it's in, etc., it's going to describe something about that person in the sense of what do they devote themselves to. What do they invest themselves in? Now, the word invest, investment, is derived from the name Vesta. You can hear it anyway just by listening to it. Which reminds me, by the way, her Greek name is Hestia, so that's how she's known in Greek mythology. That's what she's referred to. So she's the goddess of hearth fire. As I said, she's the daughter of Cronus. She's the first daughter of Cronus, so she's the eldest child, ruling Scorpio and Virgo. Because she has such a strong sexual component or essence to the energy of what she represents, how this sort of, I guess you could say, surfaces or emerges, particularly in this modern world that we live in, is seen through what we could call sexual repression, or the opposite to that, to be totally promiscuous. So they're two extremes, polarities, and this is seen through the placement of Vesta. So one of the issues with Vesta psychologically is really about finding that balance between those extremes. And a lot of that ties into the astrological zodiac. When you look at the old original Babylonian zodiac, where the sign Libra didn't even exist. Well, it existed, but it didn't have the name Libra or the assigned placement. So what we had was Scorpio depicted as a serpent, and following it was the sign Virgo, Scorpio being the sexual energy and Virgo being the spiritual energy. And when the patriarchal era, I suppose, took over society, if you like, that's when the sign Libra emerged, which is where this whole idea of marriage came from. So the sexual energy of Scorpio and the spiritual energy of Virgo, pre-Libra, was operating at a very organic, natural level. So sexual energy was used in order to transcend, to spiritually transcend. So sexual energy wasn't used in the form of, you know, mundane sexual activity and being promiscuous and so forth. So when Libra came into the picture, it then the message that was collectively sort of imposed, if you like, on society was that you couldn't have sex before marriage. That the whole thing about marriage was to be able to engage in that sexual energy and so forth. So what I'm trying to say is that pre-Libra, the sexual energy was used in a way to transcend ourselves, and it was free. It was expressed freely. There wasn't any rules or limitations as you know, as it has derived through this patriarchal society with regards to having, you know, marriage. So sex before marriage was ultimately then looked upon as the ultimate sin, according to let's say, the Bible, for example. So this is how Libra actually came into essence, came into effect. That's really important to know, because that shows us a lot of what's shaped and shifted through the collective consciousness and the collective psyche as we've evolved and continued our journey on this earth plane, if you like. So Vesta really points to that sacred sexual energy being transmuted, transcended, transformed through that sacred fire. Quite apart from the sexual act itself, it's about that deep mystical spiritual devotion that we have and that we use in our lives in a particular way or area of life. Again, depending on where Vesta is located, what sign she's in and what aspect she has. But in a nutshell, Vesta really shows the level of investment that we have about a particular area of our life. And as I said, because she's the daughter of Kronos, which is the planet Saturn, she has that energy about her, which is that really, really serious dedication. Okay. So on that same note about dedication and investment, it's the ability to really be focused and centered on a particular goal. So it's that individual that really works very, very hard and is really dedicated and devoted towards a particular cause or a goal. It's transforming sexual energy to be used for a particular cause. That's another way of looking at it. Some sexual themes, if you like, in terms of the psyche that's evolved through conscious evolution as time has gone on. In the modern sense, what Vesta will depict and show is sexual fears, sexual repression, celibacy, or the opposite to that, as I mentioned before, being totally promiscuous, or just being extremely adventurous and explorative, so really exploring with that sexual energy. It's different to Juno, which I'll talk about in a moment. Juno was all about commitment and partnership. Vesta was all about sexual freedom and expression, that energy in a totally free, uninhibited fashion, because when that energy was used in that way, it enabled Vesta to actually reintegrate into herself and become even more whole. So denied sexuality, complex sexual issues are all connected to Vesta. And just generally, whatever we devote extreme devotion to. So if you have a goal in life, a very specific goal, that ability to be totally devoted to it and focused and keeping it alive is seen through the influences of Vesta. Now, I, for example, have Vesta in my 12th house, and she's conjunct Mars. That's quite a complex little configuration I have there, but in terms of what she represents in the 12th house for me, it's really been my devotion and my investment in my spiritual development and evolution, I guess you could say. It's my desire to actually want to retreat from the 3D world and go into a space within my own self that I would call spiritual, for lack of a better word. But it's that deep devotion and deep practice that I actually have to my own spiritual journey. That's Vesta in the 12th house. So I spend a lot of time on my own. I have a lot of time out and solitude. I can be a very social person, but when somebody has strong influences in the 12th house, in order for them to feel connected to whatever is in the 12th house, so the energies of that 12th house, for me it's Mars and Vesta, that person needs to retreat. So, in my case, for example, Mars represents the vitality principle, the energy principle, assertiveness, power, direction, focused energy, all of that. For me to actually get that going, I need to retreat and go into a solitude space. And I do that very much in my own private home, even though I'm sharing my private home in this video or an aspect of it. But that's what enables me to recharge Mars and to connect to that Vesta energy. That's just a very small example. Obviously, Mars Vesta conjunction in the 12th house has much more to it, but I'm just trying to give you just a very basic little understanding of what Vesta could mean in the 12th house. So she's really, really important in the level of showing what you invest yourself in, what's really, really important to you from a deep mystical level, and how one might use their sexual energy to transcend and actually experience more ecstatic experiences. So yeah, I guess I might leave it there for now, because it is an introduction, as I said. So just wanted people to get a basic understanding. So when you're looking at Vesta in your own birth chart, you're looking at what sign she's in, house, and what aspects she has. And that will just essentially start to point and guide you into what it is that you feel really devoted to, and what you're really focused on, and what you can become really fanatical about as well. So we've got to watch that, because an imbalance can occur, and any imbalance is not healthy, right? So yeah, so that's Vesta. In short, look, her mythology is very long and very complex. I mean, I've barely touched on her mythology. I would need a few hours to just talk about her mythology. But if you're interested in learning more about the asteroids, this is the book that I recommend. Asteroid Goddesses by Dmitri. She's the queen of asteroids. She's actually Greek in origin, but she's American based, and I think she's grown up in America. But look, she's done the most amazing work in putting together this information, which is really informative and just very insightful, and goes through all the mythology and psychology quite thoroughly. And in her book, she goes through every asteroid in every different sign, in every different house placement, and aspects and so forth. So if you're wanting to deepen your knowledge and your understanding, I would recommend getting her book if you don't already have it. Okay, so we've touched on Pallas Athena series, and now Vesta. And as I said, Vesta is, where do we invest our energy? Think about that. That's pretty, I think it's pretty important. What we invest ourselves in, that's got to be major. So have a look at your Vesta and see where she is, and so what are you investing yourself in, in terms of in your own life. Now let's move over to Juno, who's also known as Hera, Remember I said in the previous video that the signs as well, for that matter, planets and asteroids have Greek and a Roman name. So Juno is the Roman name, and Hera is the Greek name. Now, Juno, just going to grab my pointers. Juno is, again, a really powerful and fascinating goddess, an expression of the divine feminine. She was the wife of Zeus, which is the planet Jupiter. There's a few different versions of her mythology, and so a couple of different stories. But in terms of how they met, Zeus apparently turned himself into a bird, and a very specific type of bird. I've just forgotten the name of it. And he descended into her breasts, actually. This was out in the field somewhere where she was just sitting around in nature doing her thing. Anyway, the weather turned really ghastly, really bad, and so this poor little bird, who appeared to be, vulnerable, descended into her breast area, and so Juno began to take care of this bird and nurture it and try to protect it from this nasty weather. And because of this closeness in terms of this bird literally landing on her breast, Juno, you've got to remember, was a goddess, and she was pure, and she was a virgin as well. And what happened was this bird, who was Zeus, Jupiter, suddenly then turned back into himself, which was this god. So he was in sitting on her lap, as it were. And this is a story anyway in terms of mythology. And as a result of that, Juno felt really compelled to have to now marry Zeus because of this vulnerability and exposure and closeness to her actual physical body, her breast. So this is how their marriage or their connection came about. So there's a part of Juno's psychology and mythology where she felt forced to marry in a way. So it wasn't through her own first personal choice, if you like. And that then starts to set some of the theme in the story about Juno, who is the goddess of marriage, the goddess of commitment, the goddess of relationships, and the relating principle. So she's a really important asteroid in the birth chart as well, a really important goddess. Her themes are psychologically are really complex, actually. But essentially she symbolizes... Actually, before I talk about that, let me just explain that whilst Juno is the wife of Zeus and ultimately represents marriage and commitment and relationships, what she brings into that and with that is her loyalty and commitment. Because in the mythology, what happened was Zeus was constantly... sleeping around, basically. So infidelity is a huge theme that runs along in Juno's story. So she was, if you read into the mythology, you'll come across a lot of work where it's said that, she was the angry wife, the jealous and angry wife. That's because Zeus was constantly cheating on her. In addition to that, he never actually had children with her. He went and had children with other goddesses. And to get back at Zeus, what Juno did was she went and had children on her own, completely on her own. So she gave birth to quite a few children, including Aries, which is the sign Aries. And Zeus wasn't happy about that because he didn't like the fact that Aries became the god of war. He didn't like that aspect of Aries. There's a lot of complexities in the mythology. But essentially, through these stories, what we're identifying is, if Juno is the principle of commitment and marriage, and symbolizes commitment and loyalty, despite how much Zeus betrayed her, she still stayed in the marriage. But what she would frequently do is retreat from the marriage, from Zeus, and she would go to complete isolation and just spend a lot of time on her own. And in that time, when she was super angry, she would just give birth to children as well. So, so that is connected to some of the complexities that we see into today's day and age with complex wives who really feel they're in an unequal partnership, unequal marriage, unequal relationship. So Juno is primarily seeking for equality and justice, and she never can really quite attain that through this union with Zeus. So she's the experiences of jealousy and revenge and anger, and plotting against and manipulating emotionally and so forth in relationships derives from Juno's story. Now, Juno, as much as she represents that committed marital relationship and experience, when you're looking at Juno in the horoscope, yes, she points to all of that and how our experience will be in partnership and marriage, and what our needs are actually. So whatever sign she's in, whatever house she's in, and whatever aspect she has to her, will describe what the person's needs are in a committed relationship. And you can actually look at this and also use Juno's story, essence, meaning, energy, in the form of other committed relationships that you might have. So in, well, let me add to that a little bit more. If Juno was aspecting your sun, for example, or your moon, so the two luminaries, say she was conjunct the sun and the moon, that brings Juno's story and energy at a very, very close place in your own self. So that would mean that the relationships you have with men and women in general, doesn't have to be a sexual relationship or a committed contractual marriage relationship, but just relationships in general, the person would really have a strong need for the relationship to feel fair and equal. Some might say, well, isn't that what everybody seeks? Well, to a degree, perhaps. But those that have Juno as a strong signature in their chart, fairness, equality, justice is primary in their relationships. And when they don't have that, that's when they turn to the pathology. Well, the pathology comes up of anger, jealousy, plotting against, rage, things like that. But that comes up more in personal relationships, I would think. When it comes to business relationships, or even having a relationship with your therapist, or whatever the case may be, there's a strong need and sense of needing to feel an equal level in that relationship. It's really important. Okay, so we're starting now to get a sense of Juno's energy. So Juno presides over all rights and arrangements regarding legal marriage and contracts. So any contractual type issues is a Juno issue. Remember in my last video also I mentioned that I did a reading for somebody at one stage who on the day that he had a Juno return in his birth chart, he received divorce papers, and he wasn't expecting that. It actually was quite a surprise. So when you're looking at Juno in the birth chart by transit, you can see issues of abandonment, separation, and deep complex commitment issues, pardon me, will arise and surface through Juno transiting in the chart. She'll bring all that stuff up. She's the ruler of Libra and Scorpio, by the way, and her polarity point is intimacy, deep intimacy, and manipulation. So when Juno feels unhappy wherever she is, her pathology of jealousy, anger, manipulating, plotting, all that stuff's going to come up. So when you hear about couples having relationship issues and lots of these themes emerging, it'll be very interesting to see where their Junos are in their chart, because this is what represents these themes. As I said, Zeus created children without Juno, and Juno created children without Zeus. So what that brings in terms of pathology and psychology is an angry wife who has children with her husband, and she's really angry at her husband because of the sense of injustice and inequality she feels. And an example of how that might arise would be that the woman sacrifices perhaps some of her goals and her dreams perhaps on a professional level, maybe you could say, career level. So she sacrifices all of that in order for the husband to actually reach his dreams and goals. And so she becomes a stay-at-home mother and gives birth to a couple of children, and feels that she hasn't really lived her goals and her dreams, and perhaps what might be some of her true purpose as well. And the way she feels that loss is because if the husband doesn't reciprocate the fact that this woman has sacrificed so much of herself for him to achieve his goals and dreams, well, then this becomes the angry wife. So you can see these patterns emerging in our modern day world. Well, this is where the pathology and psychology emerges from Juno and Zeus, that relationship that they had, which there was a lot of injustice in that relationship. So ultimately, her suffering lies in denial of deep union, which is what she wanted, because once she committed to marry Zeus, she was 100% committed to him. She wasn't sleeping around with anybody else. It didn't matter how much he did that and how angry she was. She did things to try and embarrass him and manipulate him and plot against him, but she never actually had sex with somebody else. She never slept with anybody else. She always maintained that loyalty. So Juno really represents where we most seek loyalty and where we actually offer it as well. So really important to know, where she's located, what sign she's in, what house she's in, what aspect she has. A strong Juno would also be one of those women that is an advocate for powerless women, abused children, anyone who feels powerless and feels like there is no justice in their situation. That's where a strong Juno would come in and advocate for these kind of people. Politically, economically, on an educational level as well. So when you see those women who are, trying to fight for better and more education, or for political views, those sorts of things, fighting for women essentially though, that's a person who's got a really strong Juno in their chart, who has an inherent understanding and desire to want to bring justice forth. So it's also the person who fights for the underdog, you know, a powerless sort of person, as it were. Okay. So yeah, I've mentioned in terms of personal relationships, her pathology in a negative way. So when she's stressed out, when she's not happy in the birth chart, or when she has some stressful aspects via transit happening to her, it'll bring up possessiveness, jealousy, manipulation, emotional, sexual power games as well, abandonment, betrayal, subjugation. A lot of complex qualities emerge from Juno. And with regards to children, because Zeus never actually gave her any children and she went and had them on her own, how that manifests, I think I touched on this before, but just in case, I did touch on it, but I didn't add this part to it. When a woman is unhappy in her marriage and her relationship because of the unfairness and injustice that occurs, if they have children, this couple, it is not uncommon for the woman to use the children against the father, as it were, and vice versa. That could happen with the man using the children against the woman as well. And this is all part of the pathology of manipulation, jealousy, anger, wanting revenge. You know, it's all that sort of stuff that comes up. So power struggles, emotional, sexual power struggles really emerge through Juno. That's, I guess, I'm happy to kind of leave that there. I've almost 40 minutes now. I think that's enough to really give you all an understanding of what Juno represents. And I guess just to use my own example, I've got Juno in Gemini, for instance. And I know for me, throughout my entire life, all the relationships that I've been in, quite apart from all the various facets of the world of relationships for me, one major component that if it's not there, I simply cannot stay in that relationship is communication, because I've got Juno in Gemini. So Juno is actually quite powerful in my chart because she's actually in what's called a T-square aspect. So that's a very specific aspect pattern in my own birth chart. And Juno is actually connected to my Venus and to my Pluto in my birth chart. So she's very plugged in, and therefore she gets really upset or angry if the communication factor is lacking. So think about communication in a broad sort of term, I guess, but maybe to narrow it down and be a little bit more specific. If my partner is unable to communicate to me, then I feel I don't feel understood. I don't feel like I can communicate my own ideas and desires or goals or dreams. So it is literally the communication factor that is key in my relationships. But that's just an example to show you how Juno in Gemini, for example, works, because that's where I have Juno. Okay, so just in summary, Vesta really brings to us our mystical, devotional, transcendental nature and where we invest that into, what we invest that into, and how dedicated and how focused and how goal-orientated we are with all of that. That's what Vesta brings. And Juno brings the principle of fairness and equality in commitment and in relationships, and not settling for anything less than what the person feels that they deserve or are worthy of. So Juno's the fighter of getting what she really needs and wants out of the relationship and the commitment. Now, yes, Juno is a feminine goddess principle, as are all the other asteroids that I've talked about, but I don't want people to think that I'm just talking about the goddesses in a feminine way, in the sense of they're only applicable to women's birth charts. They're equally applicable to men's birth charts, because, as we all know, the divine feminine and divine masculine exist within all of us, okay? I may be female in gender, in my physiology, but I have a masculine component to me as well. And a lot of that will be seen through our birth chart. So I've got a lot of masculine energy in my birth chart. I've got a lot of feminine energy too. So we all have that, both those divine feminine masculine energies. So when it comes to, Juno, Vesta, Pallas Athena, and Ceres, they are all fully activated in a man's and in a woman's chart equally. But I guess some of what might happen is that there's a lot of projection that can go on. So the man might project his Pallas Athena onto the women that he's attracted to, or he might project that Juno onto the relationships that he attracts. So, it's all connected. As I said before, nothing is understood, read, or seen in isolation. It can't be, because everything is connected. It's just how it is. Okay, so I'll leave it there for today, and hope you enjoyed my presentation on Juno and Vesta. The next one I will do is actually Lilith, for sure. I'll probably just do a session on her, although each of these goddesses deserve, a session unto themselves and hours, but I'm just keeping this at a very basic introductory level. I do readings, so if you're interested in having a reading from me, you can just send me a message, write a message underneath this video, and we can go from there. I am thinking of maybe teaching astrology again. I used to do that a while ago, and I might just do it in the form of one-on-one. So if that's something that you're interested in, please let me know. Apart from that, until next time, love and blessings. I hope you enjoyed the divine feminine aspects that I've been able to share with you today. Thank you, and bye for now.